Hi, everyone. Welcome to our webinar, People Leave Managers, Not Companies. I'm Erin Flannery, Community and Events Manager here at Lattice. Today, we're going to talk about the relationships between managers and employees and how to improve that experience for long-term success. Our webinar today is hosted by two awesome people ops companies, Lattice and Sapling. Just a little bit of housekeeping. We will be recording today's webinar and sending it out after the event. And we'll also be doing Q&A. You can feel free to type in your questions at the bottom using Zoom, and we'll get to that following the presentation. Okay, so just a bit of an overview of what we're going to do today. We're going to talk about the problem between the manager and employee relationship and go over some of the stats involved about why managers are so critical. Then we're going to talk about managers and the onboarding experience, move on to creating an engagement infrastructure for managers and employees, then hit some key takeaways and dive into that Q&A that we spoke about earlier. So without further ado, I'll let our first panelist introduce himself.
Hey everyone, my name is Bart Macdonald, CEO and co-founder of Sapling. Very excited to be on the webinar with everyone today, sharing our view on a topic that's very near and dear to our hearts. I've been in the people operations space most of my career and now have the incredible opportunity of leading a world-class team at Sapling. For those of you who may not be familiar with Sapling, we're a new kind of onboarding and HRIS platform for medium-sized companies. Our philosophy, we believe that when you create a great employee experience, people operations can better support their team to do their best work. And the philosophy that we have as a company is obviously deeply ingrained into our product. And that product, we're very humbled to be the chosen employee experience platform of choice for companies like Kayak, KPMG New Zealand, Reddit, Cruise, and many more around the world.
Awesome, thanks Bart. And really appreciate you doing this webinar with us today. So I'm Jack, nice to meet you everybody. I'm the CEO and co-founder of a company called Lattice. So what we do is people management infrastructure. We help companies align, grow, and engage their employees. And we do this through tools that we think employees will love and give admins the ability to create the processes that are best for their companies. We've been lucky along the last couple of years to go from 0 to about 650 customers. We have people like Glossier, Reddit, Cruise, New York Public Radio, and many more. And basically what we offer is goal setting, 360 performance reviews, anytime feedback, and manager check-ins, basically the infrastructure that you need to do great people management. So to start our conversation today, and Erin, thank you for that wonderful introduction to get us kind of primed for what we'll be talking about. To set the stage, one of the interesting things that I think all of us feel, but when you look at the data, you really see, is that the workforce really has changed quite rapidly. So a few years ago, you would start to hear, how do we manage millennials in the workforce? And this was this big sort of term, and it was this big concept that millennials were coming into the workforce. You look at the data today, and actually millennials kind of are the workforce. So people in this age group of sort of 25 to 35, that has become the largest piece of the workforce, and that trend is only going to continue for a while. And so the question today is not what do we do with this new group, but this is the way that employees are. The differences between these generations are real to a degree, and those need to be thought of. When we're thinking about retention, when we're thinking about how to make employees happy, knowing this is an important backdrop. As we mentioned at the beginning, people leave managers, not companies, and that is a trope that is often repeated, but it's actually true. You look at the data, and 50% of employees who quit cite their manager as the reason. And so this should make all of us hear alarm bells, and we should be thinking, wow, this is both my opportunity and my risk. Great managers are the easiest way to keep people happy, and bad managers are the easiest way to drive people out of my company. And the cost of losing employees, as we all know, is high. I think we don't always know just how high, but when you look at the numbers and you think about the steps of an employee's life cycle, you can see it. So I'm really excited for Bart to chat about onboarding, but that's the very first piece of what happens. So an employee joins, there's all of the costs associated with recruiting, and then they onboard, you start training them, and then they start becoming productive, and you start doing things like performance management, learning and development, and employee surveys, and all of these things. And this graph on the right here, this was done by Maya, the VP of People and Strategy at Greenhouse. And it shows you the difference between retaining an employee, onboarding them well, and keeping them at your company for a long time versus the value that a company derives from an employee if they don't stay for a long time and don't have a good experience. And when you run the numbers, the cost can actually be shocking. So I'm going to turn it over to Bart now to talk about one of the most important pieces of all of this, which is how do you engage employees from the beginning? So Bart.
Thank you so much, Jack. Certainly a great primer, and I think you really hit the nail on the head a moment ago, talking about some of the opportunities and risks we can all face as a people operations community around the impact that managers can have on employee effectiveness. One of the things that we think about here at Sapling is how can you actually go about engaging your employees from the first day of employment, or in fact, even before they even commence their job. What we realized from looking at research is that managers impact so much of the employee work experience, as you were just pointing out. In fact, new hires are 2 times more likely to leave employers that mishandle their onboarding experience. It's on managers to really set the best practices from the get-go of that new hire experience to optimize the employee's onboarding program. Now, how do we actually go about doing that? One of the most important things is to prepare the new hire for that optimal employee experience, and to do so with an onboarding toolkit. As a new hires manager, it's very essential that you create that toolkit well before the new hire commences on day one. Some of these examples we see of great onboarding toolkits really set the groundwork for open communication and also trust between a manager and the employee before they even commence employment on day one. So how do you know that your onboarding toolkit is setting up your relationship for success? We've identified 4 key areas that are going to identify if you're on the right track. Number 1, the onboarding toolkit for every new hire should crisply outline the company's mission, work values, the founder's vision, and a core overview of the product. Secondly, beyond the administration layer of completing work documents like NDAs, employment agreements, etc., it's critically important to ensure that every new hire is being socially assimilated into the company culture and the broader team, and that managers are responsible for providing them with this cross-department collaboration, and also the 101s and 202 level of how communication actually works across the organization. Is it appropriate to go up to someone's cubicle and tap them on the shoulder? Or there are other implicit norms like communicating via meetings or via Slack and other protocols. Thirdly, it's very important in the early part of an onboarding experience that every manager should provide to walk through the company's service or product line that they present to their customers. And at Sapling, we've seen some great examples of how some of our customers are managing these today, from providing live product demonstrations where their customers will come into the head office and talk about how that vendor makes them more successful through their product or service. We're also providing recordings of company all-hands meetings. Fourthly, another great asset that we see managers really helping to set up their new hires for success in an onboarding toolkit is outlining all of the company resources. And this can include some simple things like providing a buddy to ensure that that new hire is provided a really good bookend of how to be a successful employee in their first week, 30, 60, and 90 days on the job. Also providing an Office 101, something that's quite tactical, but we've all had that horror first day experience where you arrive to the office for a 9 o'clock start time, only to find that your desk hasn't been set up. You have no idea where the coffee machine is. And having a very simple overlay of this provided by your manager can go a long way. Lastly, we also see that having an appropriate document which steps out all of the key resources that a new hire will need to be successful things like having access to Google Drive or various folders is something that's really critically important for managers to provide. Then you're going to be excelling as a manager when that onboarding toolkit communicates to the new hire how they're going to be held accountable for their work. And really what we think about here with accountability is that while they're being onboarded, you as a manager have established the new hire's roles, responsibilities, and objectives within a structured timeline. And here I really want to underscore the importance of having a structured 30, 60, 90-day onboarding program. When we think about this structured timeline, we really want to encourage managers to think through 4 key things. Number 1, have they broken down and clearly communicated the new hire's goals so that they understand what are their objectives to be hitting within the first week, first month, first 3 months, 6 months, and year at that company? Secondly, have you explained how the new hire's experiences and work will actually be used to make improvements? And most importantly, what impact will they be creating to their immediate team and to the broader company? And that's something that you should ideally be selling during the candidate experience. And really, this red carpet experience is something that's really important to close out that candidate experience as you've been selling the new hire on the job opportunity. Thirdly, it's very important to explain what are the benchmarks of performance and how this performance is going to be measured. For example, if you're a manager and you're onboarding a new sales development rep, you want to ensure that that new hire understands how those KPIs are going to be tracked and what the cadence of reviewing those KPIs will be. Fourthly, and arguably most important, it's really critical to ensure that you've provided a learning plan and you've turned this into an achievable, manageable plan with explicit dates to help that new hire stay on track and accountable. These components of your onboarding toolkit will set up you and your new hire for a very successful working relationship. And remember, most importantly, to be available for any questions that the new hire has throughout their pre-boarding and onboarding experience. One of the things we also see here at Sapling as a core view of our team is that beyond the onboarding toolkit, there are many other ways to go about establishing trust and building engagement with that new hire and their manager during the first 90-day onboarding experience. This is also the time that you really want to empower your new hires to have a voice. Managers neglecting to listen to the individuals on their team is one of the prime contributors to an employee leaving the company. During onboarding, it's crucial that you know that your employees have a voice. And one of the most damning statistics we see is that 1 in 5 employees who join a company will actually leave within their first 45 days due to a poor onboarding experience. Now, coming back to this voice, there are a number of ways in which you can make sure to set aside time and ensure that you're going to be with your employees to have these important manager and employee conversations. Some of the examples here is having personal development conversations and a structured weekly one-on-one check-in. Also having things like resources conversations, ensuring that your new hire has everything that they need to be successful in their first 30, 60, 90 days of onboarding. Thirdly, ensuring that you have a clear understanding of the preferred working style of employees. One of the most common reasons we see the onboarding experience breaking down so early is that a manager at the company has typically been at the organization for a lot longer than the new employee. And they may have deeply ingrained and routinized processes. For example, sending out emails over the weekend or staying back late into the office. And if those expectations aren't clearly communicated and aligned with the new hire, this can be a significant cause of friction. And it's very important to have your managers have a very open and direct conversation around preferred working styles to understand how they can set up their new hires for success. Lastly, it's most imperative to have regular check-in and feedback intervals throughout the employee onboarding experience. Tools like Lattice are obviously fantastic to help with this, as well as Sapling, providing that forum and ability for your managers to quickly come in and pulse check and obviously have a lot of data to make sure that they're driving a world-class onboarding experience. Finally, the last component of effective onboarding that will truly set up you and your new hires for success is making this feedback and praise a routinized habit. Research that we recently found by Gallup found that praise, or indeed lack thereof, has a direct impact of employee turnover. And those feelings of unrecognized employees are actually 3 times more likely to quit in their first year in the role. Celebrating these new hire wins and course correcting some of those early fumbles and mistakes from new hires should be a critical priority during this new hire's first 90 days on the role. Without these regular discussions around performance and expectation setting, it's very easy to let the feedback and recognition loop slip. And some stats that I want to finish on now before passing back over to Jack. Number 1, companies using strategic recognition are 48% more likely to report high employee engagement, which we clearly now know starts with effective onboarding. And secondly, getting praise or recognition for good work increases revenue and productivity by 20%. So again, it's very important, not only from the warm and fuzzy side of effective onboarding from the new hire, but here the importance, as Jack will continue on with shortly, of driving real bottom line impact for the organization, starting with effective onboarding. So to conclude, forming that recognition habit from the very beginning of the employee experience is a critical component of having that engaged employee relationship. Jack, I'd love to now pass over to you to come in and talk a little bit more of what's happening beyond that initial onboarding experience and how you can help managers set up their new hires for a successful employee tenure.
Awesome. Thank you, Bart. That was a great explanation. And it is so true, I think, that the seeds of employee success are sown early, and a great onboarding experience sets the tone for the rest of your employees' time at your company. So that is mission critical. And then just as critical is how to make sure that you can maintain that. So just like you think about onboarding a customer or onboarding, a new hire, you then have to make that person, that customer, whoever you're working with, successful. The sort of handshake of trust that happens at the beginning has to be carried through the whole time. And so today, now we're going to talk about some of the tips that you can give your team for great management that will allow you to keep the relationship strong after you've started it correctly. And so we're going to talk about giving your team great infrastructure. This means giving them the tools that they need to do their jobs well and easily, and we'll talk about why that's important. We're going to talk about the framework of managers as coaches and how you can have this mindset in order to improve the quality of your managers quickly. We're going to go through some of the first-time mistakes that a lot of managers make, either early in their careers or maybe it's their first time doing it. But knowing these pitfalls can be really beneficial. And then we're going to talk about some tips and tricks to build a feedback culture and to support that on an ongoing basis. So first, setting up a people management infrastructure. You can think of this as giving your team the guardrails to make their jobs easier as managers. You think about the roles that people have throughout your company. They might be a leader of engineering, a marketing manager. They might be a sales team manager. They have a day job that has very little to do with a lot of the stuff that we're talking about here, even though as a manager, it's almost their most important role. And so what you can do as an HR team is to give them the piping that they need to do this stuff well. What we've kind of come to at Lattice is this sort of set of tools where you give the infrastructure for goals, anytime feedback, one-on-ones and manager check-ins, and then of course, reviews. And what we find is that people want to do this stuff. They know it's important. And if you can just give them these systems to make it easy, you'll get much better outcomes this way. So that's a starting point. On the thought of managers as coaches, you can think about what does, sort of the old school Dilbert style manager act like. And then you can put that in contrast to what a coach might act like, where they're building camaraderie around a team, where they're doing all of these things that are fully in support of the employee. I remember the best manager that I had was the CMO at Teespring where I worked. He's now become the CMO at Atlassian. And when he first became my manager, the very first thing he did was he pulled me aside and he said, Jack, what do you care about? And I started rattling off my sort of top goals. I was talking about the hires that I needed to make and the numbers that I needed to hit and the things I needed to get done this week. And he was like, slow down a second. Like, I want to actually know, what do you care about, you, Jack? What are the things that drive you? And then he made me go through this exercise where he really got to know me. He asked me about my values. He learned where I came from. He learned about my history. He asked about my family. And then from there, he had the context to then say, okay, how are we going to set up Jack and ultimately his team and the company for success? And he always talked about, the fact that he wanted me to think of him as a coach, not a boss. And that really resonated for me. So what are some of the things that you can do if you want to think like a coach? One is create a winning environment. And so a winning environment means that people on the team are celebrating success, not just for themselves, but for others. And so as the manager, cultivating an environment where people are proud of each other and excited for each other and working to help each other, that's what you'd see from a coach, and that's what a great manager does as well. It also means setting really clear expectations. So there should be no ambiguity about what success looks like. People should know these are the things that I'm expected to do. This is what it looks like to do a great job. And the manager can help set those parameters. They don't necessarily have to tell you every step of how to get there, but they should certainly be setting the vision and the goals for what a great performance looks like. Another thing a coach does is they provide ongoing feedback. I think part of the reason why Lattice has found a sort of spot in the market is because doing feedback once a year at the annual performance review is simply not enough. You don't give people feedback in December about something that they did back in March. Everybody forgets. You don't have the context anymore. It's really important that feedback is happening on an ongoing basis. And if you don't do that, you're going to miss the value. It's not going to sink in at the right time. And so encouraging your managers to give feedback in the moment and building that habit is really important. You also do want to hold people accountable. So responsibility and accountability are good things. These are things that make people feel like they're valued, like their work is important, like what they do matters and somebody cares. And giving people that structure and that accountability, that will enable people to do their very best work and to find greatness. A fifth thing that a coach does is they position people for success. And so you can change people, you can give people a little bit of guidance, but for the most part, people are who they are at the time that they join your company. As an aside, this is why it's important when you think about company values that you hire people who match your company values, because you can't expect to hire somebody who is completely aside from your company values and then infuse your values into them. And it's the same thing with positioning people for success. Somebody who is deeply introverted and does not want to be talking to people is going to be unlikely happy as an account executive. Similarly, somebody who wants to be spending all of their time on the phone and interacting with others may not enjoy their time as a software engineer. There's always exceptions to this, but great managers think about who their people are, what the role entails, and they try to put those things together to be set up for success from the beginning. And then finally, you want to be collaborating to solve problems. So as the manager, you want to be a sounding board, a thought partner with people on your team to work together to solve the trickiest problems. A great one-on-one might include a brainstorm around the toughest problem on your employee's mind and working together to come up with a creative solution to that. So these are some of the things that we think of when we think of great managers through this coaching mindset. We can certainly talk about more in the Q&A if other people have seen others, but these are the ones that we and many of our customers have said have worked really well for them. So now I want to transition to another interesting topic that I think is really important, which is manager challenges. Going back to that stat of 50% of employees citing their manager as the reason that they leave, a lot of these things are avoidable. So a lot of these, management is not this intrinsic thing that you are born a great manager. It's a skill set that's learned over time. And there are pitfalls that more experienced people have seen and can avoid. And like with anything else, we can teach people who haven't done it before or maybe haven't discovered those issues how to avoid them. So the first scenario is managers who don't let their people fail. Like all of the pitfalls, many of these are difficult because the intuition that we normally have in life is different than what works well as a manager. So the situation here is often, a great individual contributor got promoted to being a manager. They had everything going well for them, and now they're managing somebody else doing that role who's maybe not quite as good as them at it. And so the instinct is what? Number one, you care about the person, and number two, you want to see the thing do well. And so you jump in and you save the project, or you save the deadline, or whatever it is. The problem with this is your employee doesn't end up growing. You as a manager don't scale. And as a result, you can't become effective leveraged leader this way. And so one of the things that managers need to get comfortable with is finding that sort of the amount of rope that they can give. You don't want people drowning, but you also need to get comfortable letting people learn from their mistakes. So scenario 2 is managers who try to do everything. So this is sort of the superhero complex, where a manager who was maybe the top sales rep just got promoted to be a sales manager, and now she wants to do everything for the people on her team. She knows she's the best at it, and she just can't help but continue doing that with everybody. And I know myself, I've seen this many times in my career, and you need to work with that person to understand what their new role is. And your new role as the manager is to make the people on your team great. And you can't do that when you do their jobs for them. And so there's a balance here where you want to be doing stuff with your team to teach them. And you want your great managers teaching people. That's one of the best things that you can do. It's one of the things people love about a great manager is that they're experts who can make them better at what they do. But they don't want people who do their jobs for them. So number 3 is managers who are scared to hire people better than them. This is an easy one to see why it happens. People are naturally anxious about having somebody on their team who is great. It can be something that feels like a threat. It can be something that makes them feel like they might lose this great role that they have. The key is to flip this on their head and remind managers that they're actually going to be measured by the outputs of their teams. And so the way to be a great manager is actually exactly this. It's to hire people better than you. It's to hire the best possible people. That's what a great manager does, is they hire, retain, and keep productive the best people possible. And so if you can get people on your team who are better than you, you've completely succeeded. And in fact, as you sort of grow through your career as a manager, you're going to manage a sort of wider and wider diversity of skill sets. And there simply becomes no way to be an expert at everything. And so as a result, you need to hire people that are better than you at each thing that they do. And so you might see this come up in subtle ways. And the answer to it is to remind people that their job is actually to do exactly this, and they have nothing to be afraid of. Everybody thinks that there's going to be this scenario where, the employee and their manager flip roles. In practice, this almost never happens, and it's almost always in the interest of the manager to build an exceptional team. And then the last one we're going to cover today is managers who measure performance by number of hours in the office. This is a super common one. It's a bit of a trope at this point, but it is so true. Measuring by the amount of hours and face time somebody puts in at work is not the way to build a successful, trusting team. You want to be working towards goals. You want to be working towards the things that matter. Certainly, there are going to be times when hard work is required to hit those goals. But when you manage by hours instead of by output, you end up breaking the trust of your team. You end up creating a culture where people get burnt out. And research shows time and time again that people are doing great, do their best work when they understand the purpose and are intrinsically driven towards it. You also see things like after the 55th hour of a work week, people become unproductive. So by any measure, you want to be gauging your team's output by their performance, by metrics, by sort of clear outputs, not by the number of hours that they put in. The last point I want to talk about today that I think sort of sums up all of this is how to build a feedback culture. In so many cases, a manager actually knows what feedback employees need. For that matter, peers know what their peers need. The hard thing is that people are anxious about giving critical feedback to each other. There's a rule that says you want 5-to-1 ratio of good interactions to negative interactions. This is true in personal relationships. This is true in working relationships. And it's sort of this amount of positive to negative feedback that is sustainable for a healthy relationship. In practice, the ratio tends to be much, much higher. I don't know whether it's 15-1 or 20-1, but most people do not give nearly enough critical feedback. And as a result, people aren't hearing what they need. The reason people aren't giving critical feedback to each other is because they care. So it is misguided caring, where people want to not hurt the people that they work with, who they're friends with. They don't like confrontation, they want to avoid it. And so as a result, they end up just saying the nice stuff and keeping the criticism either to themselves, or maybe they tell a third party over coffee, but it certainly never gets to the recipient who needs it. And this is a great disservice to that person. One of the people who we've spoken to at Lattice on our sort of Resources for Humans channel was Kim Scott, the author of Radical Candor. And she summed this up really nicely. She said, we owe it to each other to point out when we're screwing up. It's the only way to get better. And I love that framing of we owe it to each other, that there's a responsibility to give great feedback to the people around you. And great feedback is not the same as a pat on the back and recognition. It's identifying places where these people can get better. We all want to grow. We all want to develop. And getting past the hurdle of constructive feedback is critical, both on the giving and receiving end, if we want to become great. And the last point here is that managers need feedback too. So this should not be a culture where it is just top down and where bosses are giving their employees feedback. It should be going in all directions. So certainly managers should give their employees feedback, but employees should also give their managers feedback. This can be along the lines of either the work they're doing and the things that they see could be different, or it could be the way that they manage. It might be that, you know, a manager is being not direct enough or not communicating enough. And managers need to be open to receiving this. And you know, this is the key, is that people receive feedback openly. That's how you get people to give you more feedback. So if you want people at your company to get better, if you want your managers to get better, if you yourself want to get better, you need to hear critical feedback. And the best way I've found to do that is when people are willing to open up, when they finally build up the courage to give you that constructive feedback, really listen and thank them for it, and tell them that you appreciate that they did that. Tell them, you know, even if you don't agree with the feedback, thank them for trying, especially if it's coming from a great place. So these are sort of some tips to build a feedback culture at your company. So a few key takeaways before Bart and I go to the Q&A portion. Number one, managers are critical for retention. Number two, the seeds of employee success are sown early. And so this is why onboarding tools like Sapling and having a great process is really critical to ensuring long-term success for your employees. Number three, make sure that you give your teams infrastructure for people managers and people management broadly. Number four, think of your managers like coaches rather than just bosses. And we talked about some of the tips for what that actually means. And then five is building and supporting a feedback culture is going to be the vehicle through which you can get to a lot of this other stuff. So with that, I think we will hand it over to Erin, and we will go into a little Q&A session.
Great. Thanks, Bart and Jack, for talking us through those slides. Some awesome tips there, both in the onboarding and during the overall employee life cycle. So we're going to hop into some questions. And remember, you can ask these directly through Zoom. So we're getting some live in now. Just to answer the first question, a few people have asked. This webinar will be shared following the event, so you will get this recording. All right, so the first question we have is HR responsible for good or poor management? Bart, Jack, what do you think?
I'll go ahead. But
Okay, Jack.
Okay, I can go ahead and take that one. Thanks, Erin. So the question, is HR responsible for good management? The HR team should be thought of as a strategic function in the organization to support and grow better management. So management is not something that's done by one person. It's not something that is, it is not a solo activity. And so HR teams are absolutely responsible for empowering great management. They're responsible for helping hire great management and clarify what the standards are and for giving those guardrails. And so if you don't have an HR team that is doing this, you are missing an awesome opportunity to, at scale, support your managers and to make them great. At the end of the day, of course, though, the manager still has to be the manager. And so this is a responsibility that's shared. It's a team effort. just like the revenue goals or the product goals are not owned by any one person. Management is a collaboration. So HR teams can do a lot to standardize and empower great management, but they're doing this in conjunction with the managers themselves.
Awesome. Bart, we have a question. I think that would be great to be directed towards you. Morgan asked if there are, what other ideas before an employee start do you have that you could recommend to help a new hire bond or socialize before they start?
Yeah, thanks for directing the question our way, Aaron. And that's a great question from Morgan, something that I certainly spend a lot of time thinking about. We're sure we've actually all had a pretty horrific onboarding experience throughout all of our careers. For those of us on the webinar today, you spend several weeks evaluating, is it time to go through and start at a new company? You then engage in the process, maybe spend 2, 4, 8 weeks or longer going through the candidate experience, meeting some of the new team members, doing an on-site tour, really being sold on the impact you can make in your new career. And then you come through to the point of negotiating an offer, you accept and maybe negotiate a start date a month out. And then what happens is it's called the black hole. Really nothing happens. You don't actually hear from the company. You don't hear from the manager. You don't know if there are things that you should be, documents you should be filling out, what's the appropriate office tie to be wearing for day one, understanding some of those social norms and cultural values before day one. So then you enter the workplace at 8:50 or 9 a.m., only to be greeted by the fact that you've brought the wrong documentation in. All of day one and day two is in fact going to be training and filling out forms. And it's a very disconnecting experience between the opportunity you've been sold and the reality. So what we think about at Sapling is really that experience between yes to desk, that moment that you've accepted an offer letter with a company, all the way through to day one is really an opportunity for progressive culture-first companies, the people operations team, and the hiring managers in particular, to continue that red carpet experience. And Morgan's suggestion around inviting some of the newer hires into company social gatherings is a fantastic initiative. At Sapling, we have the benefit of working with some incredible companies all around the world who are truly culture first and live and breathe this. And some of the things that they think about is actually encouraging every manager to send a welcome message or perhaps a welcome gift or a present to the new hire, to really start creating that bond and level of trust and affinity between the manager and the new hire on day one. Secondly, something that we see being done very effectively in pre-boarding is where managers will actually start getting into the weeds. They'll actually request that all of their new hires complete all of their legal and compliance paperwork before day one. And they will even do things like sharing pre-recorded videos of recent company all hands or town halls, so that the new hires, if they want to be, actually being put to work and starts getting an understanding of what their structured first day, first week, first month on the job is actually going to look like. So those two examples of having a welcome message or a gift being sent by a manager, and secondly, providing a structured pre-boarding experience even before day one are two examples we see. And obviously that's something that we really try to encourage as part of the process of Sapling's own product as well.
Great. Yeah, I think that's awesome advice. All right, so I think we have time for maybe 2 more questions. Jack, I think this is a good one for you. Nigel asked, for a small startup with no resources or structure for managers, in terms of how they should manage, what's the first step they can take right away to get things started?
Yeah, great question. So how do we get things going from a cold start? How do we get managers doing the type of things that we want when we have no systems in place, we have no history of this stuff? Like, how do we get going? There's 2 points here. One is, as much as I hate to not sell Lattice, you don't actually need systems for people to be great managers. People have been good managers for long before there was software available to help them do it, and the core principles of it are in many ways unchanged. And so you want to talk to your managers about what are the most important things. How can they be caring? How can they listen? How can they give critical feedback? How can they make sure to have regular intervals for giving feedback and having these conversations? And so I think the most powerful immediate tool to start with that will overnight change your quality of management, if it's not already happening, is ensuring that managers and employees are having regular one-on-ones. So this is a time that people set aside with their employees to listen to them, to talk about their biggest problems, to talk about what they're anxious about, what they're feeling good about, to hear wins, to hear places they're struggling, or anything else on the employee's mind. It's shocking to me how many people don't use this tool at their disposal and will go many weeks without having just a conversation like this and are only talking about sort of the transactional things day to day. Also, with the other types of sort of management infrastructure things like goals, performance reviews, you actually can do all of that without systems, without a lot of history there. There's a lot of great resources online for how you can, for example, set goals and talk about doing that and set those expectations early. And also there's great templates online for simple 360 reviews or simple feedback that you can do on a quarterly or biannual basis. And certainly software tools like Lattice will make those parts easier. Certainly things like Sapling will make the onboarding experience easier. But you can absolutely get these things going and started just by talking to your managers and your teams about this stuff. So those would be the initial things that I would sort of think about as you're getting going, and remembering that the most critical thing is to ensure that regular feedback is happening and that the conversation is the core of where this is all at. So ensure that those are happening and you'll be off to a good start.
Awesome. Okay, Bart, we have time for one more question. Bart, I'll direct this to you. What happens when onboarding objectives aren't met?
Yeah, that's a great question, Aaron. And thank you for remembering the audience for raising that. Typically what we see, and I mentioned a statistic earlier on in the webinar today, around 1 in 5 new hires actually looking to turn over or leave an organization due to poorly structured onboarding programs. And that's something that we see is very damning, whether it's employees within departments which are very metrics focused. Obvious teams that come to mind is around sales, marketing, and customer success, which are held responsible for various levels of quotas and KPIs, but also other teams that maybe are less customer facing. For example, accounting and back office financial services and operations. What we see is that it's really important to have those structured KPIs in place for both sides here, both for the new hire to develop a level of confidence in the impact that they're creating, both to the organization and to the team, and also for the managers as well, for them to be able to track how the new hire is progressing in their ramp-up phase, which typically lasts around 8 months, depending on the role and depending on the onboarding program. And most importantly, again, this is something that constant theme that Jack and I have been really trying to encourage in today's conversation, is around having the opportunity to course correct early. For companies that don't have a very clear focus and basically guardrails in place to measure the new hire's performance through those KPIs, you're really going to be waiting a lot longer amount of time to be able to have a good read on whether the new hire is being effectively set up for long-term success of the company. So having KPIs and goals in place as a structured onboarding program is critical, both for the new hire and the managers. And obviously, some of the anecdotes that we definitely hear is that without having those structured KPIs, it definitely increases the level of disengagement of the employee, as they can't have an appropriate access to compare themselves against their peers and the organization, as well as a delayed level of performance of getting ramped up into their role, which obviously is going to be affecting the company's bottom line as well.
All right, great. Well, that is our time for today. I'd really like to thank Jack Altman and Bart Macdonald for hosting this webinar, and of course for all of you in the audience for joining us as well. Again, we'll be sending this webinar out following today, and we hope you guys have a great rest of your week. Thanks so much for joining.